Hi, I'm Catherine, and welcome to Purple Peach Studio. Today we're going to be coloring the Summer Day at the Beach coloring page that's available for download in my Etsy shop. If you'd like to follow along, head on over there now. You can also use the tips I'll share today with any coloring page you're working on, so don't worry if you haven't downloaded it yet. To color in my page today, I'll be using Staedtler fineliner markers and Tombow dual brush pens. The Staedtlers are great for detail work, and this page does have quite a bit of small spaces to fill in. The Tombows are nice because they offer two different widths of marker tip. The brush tip has a pretty wide range of line styles and can be used to quickly fill in large areas, while the bullet tip offers much more control and concentrated color. Links to purchase these materials are in the description box below. So, let's get coloring. I always like to start with the biggest areas that will draw the eye. In this case, that's the sun, which is one of the largest solid spaces on this page. I'm not a huge fan of canary yellow, so I've chosen a tone with a little bit more orange in it. This is number 993 in the Tombow pens and comes in the secondary colors pack. I'm using the brush tip in the main body of the sun, and I'm trying to keep my strokes nice and even, all heading in the same direction so that the color looks as smooth and solid as possible. For the rays, I'm switching to the bullet tip to outline the edges first because it offers a little bit more control than the brush tip. Getting that much control on the brush tip takes a little bit of practice. To accent the rays, I'm going with this really bright reddish orange for the little pieces in between. This color also comes in the secondary pack and is number 885. I think this makes the sun look like it's really hot out, like you'd be really glad to be at the beach. If you want a more subtle effect, you could choose a color with a little bit less contrast, like another shade of yellow. The next largest area is the water, and you could go a couple of ways with this space. Since there are stripes in the waves, you could potentially choose two shades of blue with a lot of contrast. Maybe one really dark and one really light. That would really make this area stand out. I don't want a whole lot of contrast here though, because in the end, I want the figure of the girl and sandcastle to stand out more. And if the water is too vibrant or has too much contrast in it, they might get a little lost in all of the color. So I picked two darker shades of blue. The first is this royal blue color, which is number 565 in the Tombows. And the second is a little bit more gray, and this is number 528. It actually comes out quite a lot darker on paper than it looks on the pen cap. So there's really not a lot of contrast in these waves at all once I'm done. I'm using the brush tip on these waves just like I did with the sun, and I'm going in the direction of the stripes. So I'm coloring horizontally for the most part, trying again to keep my strokes really smooth, and recognizing that the brush strokes themselves will add to the texture of the waves. So I want my strokes to end up looking like waves and to kind of follow the contours of the lines that I already have down here. I don't want to just be scribbling all around randomly because that would detract from the texture that's already in this picture here. And of course that doesn't matter quite as much when you're in these really tiny small spaces because you can't see your brush strokes quite as much. Now that I have the majority of the background spaces filled in, I'm going to move on to the two main figures in this drawing, which are the little girl and the sandcastle. Both of them have a lot of small details in them, and I can use my color choices to play those up. For the girl's swimsuit, I'm using a couple of different colors of the fine liners for the dots. I love this magenta color, it's probably one of my favorites, and I end up with a lot of my own clothing in this color too. I'm filling in the dots pretty randomly because I don't want the pattern to look too regular, so I'm trying not to end up with two dots of the same color right next to each other. So as I go, I'm thinking about what colors I'll fill in the remaining dots too. Along with the magenta, I've got this really bright pink color. And I want to use both of these colors in her hat so that I can kind of make her outfit look pretty cohesive. And I'm using the same rule for filling in the stripes in the hat, in that I don't want two stripes of the same color right next to each other. Just to tie the little girl and the sandcastle together to kind of make them look like more of a unit, I'm drawing some of the colors from the girl's swimsuit into the sandcastle too. So I'm using this bright pink to accent some of the shells in the sandcastle details. These little triangle shapes could potentially be shells, for example. And I'm using the pink to fill in their little stripes. With the hat especially, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit just to make sure that I end up with all of the stripes filled and that I leave enough space to fill in some of them with my remaining colors, namely this turquoise that I have that I think will contrast really nicely with the pink and the magenta. So I'll fill in a couple of stripes with turquoise, and then I'll jump back to the magenta, and then I might jump to the pink again, just to make sure that I've struck a nice balance with all of the colors and that none of the stripes end up being the same colors next to each other. I'm going to leave the little girl's body and hair for now and move on to the main part of the sandcastle. So like I said before, I'm not a big fan of canary yellow. I just think it's way too bright, and I started to color in the sandcastle with this darker kind of brownish yellow color, but it ended up being way too dark. So I'm actually going against my own preferences here and filling it in with canary yellow because that is the closest shade that I have to sand. I don't want the sand to be too brown. I want it to look kind of happy and cheerful, so yellow it is. I'll go back in a little bit and add details in that brown color just to tone it down a tiny bit, but I didn't want it to look like mud. As I go through the sandcastle, I'm using the same colors that I did for the little girl's swimsuit and hat to fill in the flags up at the top, as well as the window spaces and the door spaces. And these have really tiny details in them, so you can have a lot of fun deciding what kind of patterns you want to use. So for example, with these big doors, I'm not coloring them just solid blue. I'm going in and doing kind of a little checker pattern to maybe suggest that they're shells or something else, not quite solid. They might just be kind of fanciful because I think that this sandcastle is really like this little girl's dream sandcastle and not even necessarily a real sandcastle, so it might exist only in her imagination, and that's okay. I think one of the most quintessential summer objects is the bucket and shovel used on the beach. And in my mind, these are always really bright colors of plastic. So I'm using this bright green to fill in the bucket and the spade here. You can see that there's a little bit of bleed through in the stripes on the spade, and that's because I'm coloring in a really small space, and it's very concentrated color. But for the most part, these markers don't bleed through the paper, and that's because they are water-based instead of alcohol-based inks. I'm gonna go back now and fill in the little girl's skin tone. I don't have the portrait pack from Tombow. If you do a lot of human figures, that might be something you want to invest in. It includes a whole wide range of skin tones, but for my purposes today, I'm just using this kind of beige color. And then I'll go back around her and fill in the rest of the sand. Again, using this way too bright canary yellow color. But as you'll see in just a minute, I'll use the brown to kind of tone it down and add some of my own detail to this page. As I'm coloring in the sand, I'm thinking about the same things that I did when I colored in the sun, and that is I want to keep my strokes really smooth and even, all going in one direction. I don't want to scribble in as I'm coloring because that would add texture to the sand that I don't want to be there. Instead, I'll go back and I'll add in these little dots in a more yellow-brown color to give the sand a little bit of texture, desirable texture, that is not scribbled texture, but kind of like you can see the sand particles. We're rounding the bend toward the end now, and I'm going to fill in the sky. So in my experience, a lot of blue markers just turn out to be way, way too dark. And I know this one is going to be a little bit darker than I want, but at least it will be bright, so it'll contrast with the water a little bit. You might not want a whole lot of contrast between your sky and your water, and that's okay. There are hazy summer days when you can't even tell the difference between the water and the sky. So in that case, you might opt for a darker or more grayish blue rather than this bright blue color. The birds don't have a whole lot of detail in them. They're pretty small figures. I'm filling them in with some stripes and hashes just to give them some texture of their own. They're supposed to be seagulls. Seagulls are brown and white, so I'm giving them brown and white stripes and shading. The clouds, I want to stay mostly puffy white, but I am adding in just a few little dots to give a hint of color in this grayish blue. Like maybe it might rain later in the day, but there are only 2 clouds, so you probably don't have to worry too much about that. Now that the main part of the drawing is complete, I'm going to move on to the border. And I want my border here to stay consistent with some of the objects that are featured in the main image. So I'm coloring in these little triangle shells here in the same way that I did the ones in the castle. That is, I'm just using this bright pink color in the fine liners to fill in some random stripes. And I'm not giving them a very regular pattern. I'm just kind of filling in stripes here and there to give a suggestion of color in them. And then with these stripes all along the edge, I'm using all of the colors that I used in the main image to kind of pull it all together. That way, I think this gives the look a little bit more cohesion, and it draws all of those colors out and kind of gives them their own little mini spotlight in the border. And I'm using the brush tips on the Tombow markers for those colors. And of course the Stetlers only have one tip, so I'm using that one. But it goes really fast with the brush tip. You use pretty much just one stroke is all you need when you're filling in these stripes with the brush tip, and it's really nice. The pails and the spades I'm coloring just the same as I did in the main image, just because I want the whole thing to tie together. And that's it, our completed coloring page. So here is the before, just the line drawing that you can download from my Etsy shop. And here it is, all bright and filled in. Thanks for coloring with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please be sure to tag me in your artwork on Facebook and Instagram. I'm at Purple Peach Studio. Have fun!